These men stood behind the most feared gun of the Second World War, the German 88. It was powerful enough to tear Allied bombers from the skies and obliterate tanks like they were nothing more than ants. But the people who served in its barrel were far darker because 90% of flak gunners never lived to see the war's end. So, why did so many of them die? The birth of 88. By the early 1930s, tensions were high, as Germany was secretly building some of the deadliest weapons despite the Treaty of Versailles. Engineers were already thinking of going beyond what the regular norms of armies were at that time. Not infantry rifles or small-caliber weapons, but the Germans saw the future. They needed to build something that would dominate the sky. This is because bombers were now capable of flying higher than ever, carrying heavier loads and reducing cities to ashes in a matter of days. To counter them, Germany needed something new, a cannon that would destroy even the fastest aircraft and obliterate bombs even if they were reaching the stratosphere. The results? An 8.8-centimeter Flak 18, later refined into Flak 36, and then the Flak 37. It was such a huge innovation for them, despite being unknown to the world. The Flak 37 was capable of shooting from near horizontal to almost vertical. But the main power is in its shell, which was time-fused to explode at altitude. One hit from this machine could annihilate an entire aircraft. The Flak 88 was not just precise, but it could adapt to the battle quickly. Even though it was created to dominate the sky, on the open battlefields of Spain and then North Africa, the Germans found something even more interesting. They realized that the Flak 88 could also be used to destroy tanks. And mind you, this was the time when most anti-tank guns were struggling against the heavy Allied armor. But when the Flak 88 was used against it, it destroyed tanks even from a full 2 kilometers away. The results were enough to get the attention of everyone, including the higher-ups. The 88 was known as the best anti-aircraft weapon available, but no one realized how innovative it would be. Not only did it down planes, but also destroyed bunkers, many infantry positions, and enemies. Well, everyone saw this gun as the manifestation of the devil itself. And then, 1939 came with Germany entering World War II with over 2,600 flak guns. This was more than twice as many guns as Britain had at that time, while America didn't own any. But this was just the start, because the Germans ended up producing over 21,000 units of different versions of the 80s throughout this deadly war. However, the crew was the one to pay a price that most wouldn't recover from, which we will talk about in a bit, so keep watching. After mass-producing the Flaks, they further refined them. The Flak 36 had a multi-section barrel that was much better for replacement and repairability. There was also a steel shield for the crew to protect themselves against the enemy fire, and many other design improvements that would make the movement and the aesthetics of this deadly weapon a lot better. Then came the Flak 37, which improved the targeting instruction along with the data transmission system, allowing the gunners to receive target information from a central fire control unit. To make this crazy, they also had a direct view sight for the ground target. In other words, this aircraft had crazy precision while boosting its reputation as an anti-aircraft gun. The issue with Flak 88. But as good as this gun was, well, there were some issues too. You see, most nations had developed time proximity fuses that would automatically detonate when approaching a certain distance, but the Germans never managed to field them. In other words, their shells had lower efficiency because they could either explode too short or overshoot, missing the target often. However, the Germans countered this issue with the sheer volume of shooting, and some planes were never returned home. However, the Allied forces implemented countermeasures, and the efficiency decreased even further as they began using countermeasures against radars and electronic jammers. On average, it took 4,000 shells to down one plane or bomber, but afterwards, the number was increased to 16,000 shells per kill. Still, the Flak was a very feared anti-aircraft system throughout the war since it destroyed hundreds of planes and thousands of crewmen, even making them bail out and then getting captured. But then came a huge problem because the Allies knew that the little chink in the armor here and started targeting the Flak batteries relentlessly. The Flak 88 had a high muzzle velocity of around 2,700 feet per second, making it quite effective. It could reach altitudes of up to 26,000 feet in the air, more than enough to destroy almost any aircraft it hit. The flat trajectory was perfect for ground targets as well. What's even impressive about this Flak is that it could fire up to 20 rounds per minute, thanks to the semi-automatic sliding block breech. As soon as you fire, the Flak 88 would recoil and eject the casing automatically. Its shell weighed just under 10 kilograms, and inside was 1 kilogram of explosive, along with a steel casing designed to explode. Flak 88 versus the tanks. While we have talked a lot about Flak's capabilities in the sky, it became even more popular to fight against the tanks, and later it would turn deadly against the Flak gunners as well. During the war with Europe, there were rare encounters with the tanks. However, the previous technology they had wouldn't even scratch the tank. This is where the 80s were brought in to destroy these tanks and dismantle them. Then came the Battle of Arras, where the British launched a surprise armored counterattack on Germany. To counter them, they used the Flak 88, which destroyed tanks with remarkable efficiency. That's where the Germans decided that they should use the Flak against armored tanks too. Soon enough, Germans even acquired special armor-piercing rounds for the Flak 88, such as the Panzer Granit 39 and 40. These were special rounds because they would cause internal explosions after penetrating the armor. The 88 was also called to fight against the Soviet armored units, but then everyone realized the vulnerability of the crews. All the Allies realized that in order to counter this madness, they would need more firepower, more speed, and more precision to counter the deadliest weapon that the Germans had. Flak casualties. You see, most Flak batteries were dug into open fields, city edges, or factory roofs. Once positioned, they were quite immobile. This means that the Allies found the perfect way to counter it by finding the batteries. Some fighter bombers swooped low, firing with machine guns, and bombers also released special cluster munitions that were designed to destroy the Flak crews. You see, if it were infantry, the crews would be able to retreat. However, the Flak crews stayed with their guns. If they abandoned them, the skies above Germany would become the very ally of the Allied bombers, which it did, and the fighters started dying one after another. This came at a very heavy price, because later, Germany ran out of trained soldiers. Teenagers from Hitler's youth, wounded veterans, and even elderly men were then pressed into service for the guns. This was an even bigger issue because most of these men were given only weeks of training before facing the waves of B-17 and Lancasters. Due to the lack of experience, this went on to cause only more deaths. After the battle ended, it turned out that only 10% of the Flak gunners survived World War II, and in other words, only 1 out of 5 gunners made it alive. By 1944, around 1.2 million people were serving in anti-aircraft defense, which was almost half of the Luftwaffe's manpower. But then, in 1943, Germany was constantly under bombardment. Entire cities were flattened by British and American raids. To shield their urban centers, the Nazis built huge Flak towers in Berlin, Hamburg, and Vienna. These fortresses were made of concrete, where some walls were as much as 3 meters thick. Each tower had 80s with 20mm cannons, and even the massive 12.8-centimeter guns, which were much bigger in size than what we're used to. They also worked as air raid shelters, protecting many civilians inside. From the rooftops, Flak crews would fire the bomber formations while below, Families were put inside the reinforced chambers. This tower was quite strong, and only a few bombs could penetrate it. Yet, only 8 of these fortresses were built. This is why Allied bombs would simply flow around them, striking the softer targets inside. For any flak gunners on top of the towers, the survival chances were higher, but the ones in the open faced a lot of death. After the Allied forces closed in on Berlin and Vienna in 1945, these towers became the last-stand fortresses that were fought over street by street. As Germany was collapsing, the flak crews were facing more destruction. Since they were unable to move, the Allied forces gained air superiority. Bombers filled the skies day and night, while gunners were the ones enduring endless pain, firing barrages, and had to fire until the barrels glowed red. Flak crews needed to be always alert and defend the skies, as well as the ground. These towers were also positioned around the most valuable targets for the Allied forces, so naturally, the risk of flak crews being hit was much higher than anything else. In the second phase of the war, 50 to 70% more casualties occurred, and the final desperate months for the Nazis were miserable. There were many reports where teenagers were given these weapons, and most died on the spot. By the end of the war, the Luftwaffe lost over 500,000 men, and most of them were flak personnel. As we previously discussed, statistics indicate that only 1 in 5 individuals survived. For every bomber they brought down, dozens of gunners were killed. Legacy of the 88 and its crews. In the end, the 88 left a legacy that is the perfect mix of fear and tragedy. Technologically, it provided a broader perspective on developing the right weapon. Even NATO's anti-aircraft system is inspired by the Flak 88 today. However, the story of these flak crew members is the greatest sacrifice they made. Very quickly in the war, all the flak crew became exhausted due to mobility issues and constantly getting pressured by the British and the Americans. On one end, we have the Allied pilots who knew that the black puffs were coming from the flak, and every bombing run of that time was to suppress these guns. To them, flak crews were executioners of anything in the air, and to the Germans, they were heroes who were defending their homeland. Both were simply standing on business, open air, bracing for the war to de-escalate, hoping to win. This is one of the main reasons why the casualty rates for flak gunners are above 90%. The guns were quite deadly, but the flak crew was defenseless, left dead, only to rot and decompose. If you enjoyed our video, make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell icon for more history-related videos. See you at the next one.